Welcome to our Directors Dialogue series. This is a constellation of conversations that I have with thinkers from different disciplines and artists from around the globe as a way of sharing ideas and points of discussion about the relevant issues of our time with a broader audience. We're sitting here today because we're really excited to be the North American premiere of the Great Animal Orchestra. And we have partnered very naturally, quite frankly, with the Fondation Cartier de l'Art Contemporain, or the Cartier Foundation of Contemporary Art in Paris, for co-organizing this exhibition. I say natural partnership because we have some pretty incredible shared values. Among them, the belief in the importance of curiosity and discovery as pathways to learning and knowledge, the belief in the value of the multisensory and the incredible intersections of art, culture, and science as ways of really prompting that learning and discovery. So here with me today is Bernie Krause, soundscape ecologist extraordinaire. I just love saying that. As well as Hervé Chandès, the General Director of the Fondation Cartier. And we're going to have a great conversation. But first, a few words from Hervé.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Lynda. First of all, I would like to thank everyone here at the museum, Lynda, Trevor, and the team. Of course, Bernie, Catherine, and the team of the Cartier team and the Fondation team. So just to, so I'm the General Director of the Fondation Cartier. The Fondation Cartier, the historical base of the Fondation Cartier is in Paris, in a beautiful building made by Jean Nouvel. And the Fondation has been created about 40 years ago. And the mission of the Fondation is to promote artists from all field of creation through exhibition, performance program. We are also publishing books. So as I said, we are based in Paris, but really the Fondation has also this international program. And the American premiere of the Great Animal Orchestra is today is a wonderful example. I just would like to add, so the field of the Fondation of creation, is mostly visual art, but also we have worked with mathematicians, we are working with botanists, we are working with movie directors, cinema. We worked with David Lynch, we work with singers, we work with Patti Smith, we are working with young artists, known, unknown. So we are really, the point of the Fondation is curiosity, is beauty, is knowledge, and is sharing with the public.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Hervé. And before we actually start our conversation, we have two videos that we're going to share with you. One is from the United Visual Artists, who was Bernie's partner in creating the Great Animal Orchestra, and then we have something from Bernie himself. So I think I say hit it.
The Great Animal Orchestra program represented here at the Peabody is the culmination of a life's work in soundscape ecology. Every example you hear in this piece begins with a raw recording of soundscapes from various locations in the wild. To digress for a moment, when I first began doing this field work, the method I was taught limited me to the recording of one bird or one mammal or amphibian at a time, and to store those recordings on a shelf somewhere for researchers to hear at a later date. But I came to this adventure with a professional musical background, and for that reason alone, I brought a bias that was more holistic to my acoustic exploration of the natural world, one that encompassed listening to whole habitats and exploring the meaning expressed through those collective voices. And therein, I firmly believe, lies the wonder. Jumping ahead a little bit, in 2012 I had written and released a book called The Great Animal Orchestra, Finding the Origins of Music in the World's Wild Places. It got favorable reviews and was translated into 7 or 8 languages. A well-known anthropologist working with the Yanomami tribe in northern Brazil, Bruce Albert, gave a copy to Hervé Chandès, who in turn contacted me in 2014 with the idea of transforming some of my field work into a large-scale sonic art piece. Hervé came to visit my wife Catherine and I in California to audition some excerpts from my archive. From those meetings, I proposed a selection of 15 or 16 different habitats to choose from. Hervé and his colleague from the Fondation Cartier, Thomas Delamare, chose 7. With the raw field data from those selections, I began the transformation process, taking each habitat and generating an acoustic narrative from the recordings that I felt would capture and transmit in its final form the stunning wild essence of each environment. Yet in order to make everything work and to convey a new layer of intent, we were still lacking a fundamental piece of the puzzle. Because we're a visual culture, meaning that most of what we know through our experience of the world has been through what we see, we decided to include a visual component. This disparity is even prevalent in our language. How many times do you hear the expression, "I see what you're saying"? It's not easy to represent sound visually. However, technologies in the early 2000s were just emerging that allowed us to do just that. Spectrograms are graphic illustrations of sound, images that show sound in time and frequency. On the screen you see a spectrogram of a natural habitat located in Zimbabwe. Notice how each species occupies clear bandwidth on the slide. The low-sounding animals can be found at the bottom of the slide, while the higher-sounding critters are seen midway or higher in the image. With the expertise of Matt Clark and his team at United Visual Artists in London, the problem of converting those sounds into instantaneous streaming images from proprietary software they developed was solved. In other words, the UVA software actually reads the sound real time and converts it into spectrograms. UVA's contribution had the added benefit of expanding these images into spectacular large format pieces, a consequence I could not have imagined when I began working on this project. Biophonies, the soundscapes that spring from the collective sound produced by all organisms in a given habitat, signify a sense of place. In doing so, they also convey the viability of that habitat. These biophonies appear without bias or preconditions. It's just pure, incontrovertible information that can be dismissed only at our own peril. But how do we pass that information along so that it becomes part of our consciousness? This is an important issue that I've tried to deal with since the very beginning of my devotion to this adventure. How do we reach those large, disparate groups of people with these messages? As a scientist, when I write a paper, have it peer-reviewed and published in some obscure journal, perhaps half a dozen colleagues or students will read it, and if I'm really lucky, reference it in a paper that they're writing. However, if, as the late John Cage suggested, I transform my field data into works of art without sacrificing the integrity of the material, then the piece and what it conveys will be unassailable and connect with folks of all ages and backgrounds. Cage understood as I do that because we're working with natural soundscapes, the atavistic origins of many aspects of our culture, including music, language, and theater, the concept is too new to have accumulated significant bias. It's accessible in its natural state to anyone, anytime, anywhere. At this stage of my life in my mid-80s, it's getting harder and harder to crawl in and out of tents or to bushwhack through tropical rainforest undergrowth. But I love this work, and especially bringing it into the public sphere. My idea of art is to create these works of wonder I most want others to hear and see manifest in the world. And to do that, I devote whatever energies I have remaining to ensuring that these messages get out and are heard. This gathering today here at the Peabody Essex Museum is part of that important process.
All right, well, I think those two videos set us up very well for our conversation. And there was a bit of information there in the video that you produced, Bernie, about how the two of you came together. But Hervé, you know, you're handed a book, you read a book. I mean, really, what captivated you in order to be getting in touch with Bernie?
I contacted Bernie before, at the very beginning of the reading. I was just seduced. I have to say that before the Great Animal Orchestra exhibition at the Fondation, we have done few exhibitions related to animals, nature. The first one was a show about birds. And it was a very classic show, if I can say classic, because it was a beautiful visual works, very beautiful. And it was really about it was a very aesthetical exhibition, but it was an exhibition to see. And then we did another exhibition titled Being Nature. Being Nature. And the center of the show was a fantastic collection of insects, but with a visual approach, not a scientist approach, a visual approach. And then it was, so this collection was the center of the exhibition, and around that, like satellites, we had few artists and few works. But the epicenter was the insect. But so it was very visual, and to say that myself, I'm I'm attracted by nature, animals, etc., ornithology, etc., etc., bird watching, all these things. And for me, I don't see an obstacle to have nature in a museum of contemporary art with artists. For me, it's not even a question. Artists, nature, art, it's about beauty, it's about knowledge, it's about creation. It's about creation. Mathematicians, birds are, for me, in the same group. And then, so we did these two exhibitions, but I was, in my head, I was still looking for a new idea, a pretext to go back to the animals, to invite animals at the Fondation. But no idea, and I did not want to repeat something visual. And then I bought the book. I say, him.
Yeah, well, it also points to the
Music,
power. Yeah, well, it points.
hearing.
Yeah, it points to the power of words, because on top of the soundscapes and the musical talents that you have, you clearly are a very effective writer. There's a lot of poetry going on in the language, and I suspect that's part of what attracted you.
And somewhere for me, it's much more mysterious, and there is this. It's really important, and it's and it's also listening is really, in my opinion, in nature is paying attention. it's a point.
So Bernie, about this listening, I mean, I've been tempted, and you've heard me say this already, that I want to tell people that this is an exhibition they really must see. I mean, this is how we talk in our business. But in point of fact, I think I need to change my language to say that this is an exhibition you must listen. So could you talk about listening? Because you've made some, I think, very emphatic distinctions between listening and hearing.
Well, thank you. These soundscapes are, they're a narrative of place, and they tell us very clearly in a language that everybody can understand because the language is universal when it comes from all of these organisms that are trying to express themselves. And they're expressing a feeling of life. They're life-affirming sounds that we need to hear that help us as well and heal us. So there's a lot of language there, and there's a lot of language to decipher. It's the Library of Alexandria. It has so many, Hervé was just talking about mystery. All this mystère is part of what these animals are expressing. And to me, it just makes me feel good to be part of that and to be engaged with those critters. Because for me, that's made a big difference in my life. Also, from a health perspective, I have a terrible case of ADHD,
Oh.
which I've suffered since I was a kid.
Huh.
And there was no drug or no therapy that ever helped me until I went into the natural world and just sat there in a forest. The Japanese call it forest bathing, by the way.
Oh, yes.
Shinrin-yoku.
Yes.
And it's the idea that if you go into the forest and engage with the natural world, you become a healthier person. You become a more centered person. You become more engaged with life. And that was why I've done this.
But let's go back to that concept of listening.
Yeah.
Because our senses are either turned on or turned off by various things. And,
Yeah.
you've made some really important distinctions in the book between the hearing and the listening and what the listening actually demands and commands us to do.
Sure. I've written a new book called The Power of Tranquility in a Very Noisy World. And what it speaks to is actually going outside and making a note of all of the sounds that you hear. What are the sources of those sounds? What makes you feel good when you're listening to them? What makes you feel upset or stressed when you're listening to them? And this engagement with the world from a hearing perspective is really important. There's another issue too, of course. We don't have a lot of words in our language, in English certainly, but in most other Western languages, to express and describe sound. Most of the words that we have are visual. If you think about it, remember I said, I see what you're saying?
Yep.
It's a disconnect right there. So we have to learn to listen again. We have to learn to listen to each other. We have to learn to listen to the sounds around us and how they engage us. And listening is a very important component of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was it like to collaborate with UVA? I mean, obviously it's an incredible use of technology. And as I was sitting and watching, I kept thinking I was looking at the equivalent of like an electrocardiogram or a musical score or even a dance score, which many people possibly haven't even seen. The dance scores are incredibly abstract.
We actually wrote a ballet. I wrote the score for a ballet, which was performed in France and filmed in France. So there's a video of that called Biophony. Performed by the Alonzo King Lines Ballet in San Francisco, an international group based there.
But again, you're using a certain form of technology as you've gone out into the landscape, and then there's a very different kind of technology that the digital involves. So what was that like for you to work with that sort of technology and that kind of collaborator?
Well, working with UVA, who we were introduced to through the Fondation Cartier, has been a seamless effort for us. We explained what we needed to have done in a large format like this, and Matt Clark and his team just ran with it. They understood immediately what it was we needed to do, and there was we've never had anything but a really wonderful exchange and relationship. We set what we were looking for, they delivered it, and the evidence is right here.
So who picked the colors? You know, as
They
you
did.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it's very color cued in the presentation.
Well, one of the reasons I'm a listener is because I can't see very well either. So listening helps.
You have a mounting list of issues. No,
I know it's terrible when you get to a certain point.
What a riot! But
I'm still here.
No, that's fantastic. So, the one of the elements of this piece that I have not heard you talk a lot about is the following. In the installation itself, there is a border on the floor of a pool of water.
Yeah.
So where did that idea come from, and what are you hoping to achieve with it?
I believe that originated with Matt, and and he thought that it would be really nice to have a reflection of the screen where people could see that from different perspectives, and it would expand the room a little bit, the space in the room, by having that reflection of the water. People just have to be very careful not to fall in.
And also, I think the aesthetic relation between technology and water.
Yeah, and when low frequency events occur, like the elephants or thunder, there's a device which he's created within the pool to make the water ripple so that it changes the perspective of light. It's really, really way cool.
Yeah. Well, it also grounds us. I mean, it reminds us of being on the earth, if you will. It does give a sense of the environment. So, Hervé, this has been shared around the world since you commissioned it in 2016. What kinds of reactions have you gotten from the various audiences?
The Great Animal Orchestra first is very popular. Everywhere it has been shown, in Milano, in Shanghai, in Seoul, in Paris, in London, it's always the same reaction. Really, people are surprised, and I think the very important point is the relation with aesthetic, beauty, and knowledge. Beauty supports knowledge. And I think the installation is talking to everyone, so it's very democratic, and I think it's a very beautiful point to also as a warning, because this is something also perhaps you should talk, Bernie, about the question of the before and the after, about the quality of biodiversity, and it's.
Yeah, one of the key issues here is that I have about 5,000 hours of material that I've recorded from all over the world, both marine and terrestrial. Fully 50% of that collection comes from habitats that no longer exist. We're not talking about individual creatures. We're talking about whole habitats.
Yeah.
And either they're totally silent because the whole environment has been destroyed, or they're so compromised by human endeavor, mostly, that they can no longer be heard in any of their original form. And that's a pretty startling number, and we have to think about that.
Well, as I was just watching this upstairs before we started this, that to me was the most telling aspect of what you've done, because to listen to the strength of the before and the weakness or the total absence of the after, it speaks volumes, frankly, in terms of the kinds of messages and experiences that you're hoping people can realize.
Sure, and along with that idea is the fact that all of this is expressed without words, without language. So it reaches across all lines, whether you're 5 years old or 80 years old, it doesn't matter which culture you come from, you understand immediately when you don't hear these things as a result of some action on our part, you understand immediately the consequences. It's unassailable.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been interested in some of the phrasing that you've used. You talk about sonic texture, sonic layers, but to go back to some of the points you were just making, you talk a lot about sonic narratives. So, what do you think the sonic narratives have the capability to tell us?
Everything we need to know about our relationship to the natural world, nothing less.
Hmm. Hmm. And when you hear that, Hervé, what do you think of that?
I would say that just to continue what you just said, Bernie, that Great Animal Orchestra it's about diversity, it's about variety, and also it's about the languages. And I think it's really important because languages, the diversity of the languages, it's in the nature, in nature. And I'm talking about, because the question of biodiversity and sociodiversity, our languages, the connection, the link is extremely important. So when you lost biodiversity, you lost the forest, and the people who are in the forest disappear. So you lost the language. So everything is connected. I think it's also a very important point to bring.
Yep.
And Hervé, you have spoken several times today, and I know you think of this as a very strong value for the foundation about beauty. And for some people, for some odd reason, beauty can actually be an old-fashioned or out of step or almost, superficial kind of concept. So I'd love to hear how you would express, why you think beauty is something that is so important in our lives.
Difficult to say, but beauty is something first I enjoy. Beauty is pleasure. And beauty, it's a platform for me to share knowledge, for education, to share between us. Without beauty is diversity, beauty is pleasure, beauty is sharing, beauty is without beauty we are just lost.
So it's possible, I suppose, to also think of beauty as something that's very comforting, or perhaps, sort of a safe way to open the door to difficult things. Does that resonate with you?
Yes. When we, I remember when we experienced for the very first time the Great Animal Orchestra at the Fondation Cartier, and the question was really also for me. There is a question of the how a museum of working with artists can be involved in all issues related to climate change, to nature, biodiversity, etc., etc. And in my opinion, to communicate, to translate, to share these questions, issues, topics, if you have not the beauty is a bridge. Beauty is a bridge. I don't know how to say, but it's just by instinct.
You've said it very well. Thank you very much. Not to worry. So, Bernie, you've been all over the world, and how have you picked the places where you've gone? I mean, has there been a specific reason or point of curiosity for some of these environments? Did you have a plan in terms of I need to go to 50 sites around the world? I mean, or was it just happenstance?
I began working with some museums because I needed to make a living at this work somehow. So when I got my PhD in 1981, I began to send my CV out to various museums to say, you know, I'd like to do installations for you of these sounds. And right off the top, I got some support from museums like the California Academy of Sciences and Natural History in New York and so on, who sent me on these missions to collect natural soundscapes for their installations. The problem here, and in terms of the designs of these exhibits, the problem was that they only wanted to use these sounds as kind of background music, you know, the way the background music is used to fill a space, but not to have any particular function. It didn't even necessarily need to relate to the exhibit that you know, I'd been sent to record. And so what I found was I was always searching for a way to express this material in a much more cohesive and engaging way. And it was when we met with Hervé and the Fondation that question was solved right away. So yeah, I've traveled all around. I'm looking for places that are the most remote in the world because they generally express themselves through the biophonies, through the expression of the organisms that express themselves in these habitats. They're generally more, there are more animals there. They've found these niches for themselves that are that show that the habitats are healthy. So I'm looking for healthy habitats because I want to know what these places sounded like years from now. So I've got this collection of material that goes back to the 1970s and 80s that shows what the world really sounded like. And there's a huge cry after that right now. People want to know what that is like.
So am I correct in thinking, though, that you yourself might not have understood at the beginning of what you were recording that you were actually seeking this documentation of the evolution of biodiversity?
I didn't give a damn about that. I just wanted to feel good and feel healthy. And when I was in the habitat itself, it made me feel good. So I was drawn to these habitats because of a health reason. And it never occurred to me until I began to travel to Africa and hear these sounds with the animals, each in its own bandwidth, and try to show these things to the people I was working with, the scientists that I was working with in the departments, like at the California Academy of Sciences, to try to explain what was going on in this world sonically that I heard. I had a terrible time introducing that idea. But finally, I was so compelled to express what I was seeing and feeling as a result of my presence there that I decided that's what I had to do for the rest of my life and have been doing it ever since.
So then clearly you must have been mapping in your mind the places that you wanted to keep going back to in order to be tracking.
But I didn't know that I had these kinds of before and after pieces until very recently, like within the last decade or 12 years or so.
Wow.
So it's just recently I've realized, you know, I've got something here that had never occurred to me before.
So in your book, you write about the origins of the concept of soundscape, because you do describe yourself as a soundscape ecologist. So what are the origins of the notion of soundscape?
Murray Schafer, the late Murray Schafer, a Canadian composer and naturalist in the 20th century, was trying to define sound and what he was listening to. He was a great listener, and he came up with this whole idea of sound walks and going out and listening to various sources of sound in your neighborhood to understand what you're hearing. And one of the concepts that he came up with in a book called Tuning of the World in 1977 was the idea of soundscape. Soundscape meant all of the sounds reaching the human ear from whatever source there is. I decided that there was more to the soundscape than just the soundscape. And and what are these sources? How do you identify them? Well, the first source is the geophony, geo meaning earth and phone meaning sound. Um, and that's been around for 4.5 billion years since the formation of the earth, but there were no organisms to hear them, these sounds, until about 55 million years ago. When the organisms evolved, we had the biophony, bio meaning life and phone meaning sound. So, and they began to produce sounds themselves. And then, of course, there was us, the anthropophony, which create a lot of noise, which mask all of these natural soundscapes. And it's affecting the world in which we live in a way that we need to think about how we're going to deal with that.
Well, you're describing the distinct difference between symphony and cacophony in many respects.
Yep.
I'm just going to take this moment to say that we're going to have a question and answer period for everyone online. So, we have the capacity for you to write in questions in the chat function. So, get ready to start asking some questions soon. There was an anecdote in your book about a particular animal that really surprised me. And it was an animal that you described as like the noisiest animal in the world. And do I need to give you a hint?
Yes,
Okay, so talk about the snapping shrimp.
Oh, no, it's the loudest animal.
Oh, the loudest, okay.
Based on its size.
Okay.
It can create a signal. It snaps, it's a very small shrimp. It's about 1.5 inches long, and it snaps this claw so quickly that it creates a cavitation bubble that when it bursts, puts out a signal underwater about 200 dB. That's pretty loud. It's like shooting off a .357 Magnum at your ear.
Oh, wow.
And, without earphones. So it's a really loud sound. The reason that the snapping shrimp does that is to stun fish as the fish are swimming by, and then it just kind of ambles over to the fish and grabs a little part of the caudal fin, the tail fin, or the dorsal, and it has a meal.
So it's sort of like an underwater sonic boom.
It is an underwater sonic boom, but whales also do that, and dolphins do the same thing. They put out this crack that stuns other animals.
So I'm going to ask both of you to answer this question because inherently what you are offering us is not just the opportunity to listen, but to think and presumably to take action in terms of this collaboration and commission. How political is this for you both?
Well, all art is political to me, so it doesn't really matter. And we're transforming this into an art form, and it's a political statement. But it's not a political statement of one issue or another. It's a political statement that asks the question about life itself. And, what kind of lives do we want to live? And so that's really where it's at for me.
I share
Hervé?
your point. I think it's political, but I will not use political because, in my opinion, political now is too short, too close, too simple. We have to think at large, and political doesn't help.
Yeah, and to me, I never think in those terms really when I'm creating these things because it doesn't really have any bearing on the way that politics are defined now. To me, these natural I think of these natural soundscapes for me when I hear them as the voice of the divine. And again, it has no particular definition to it in the human existential sense. But it's meaningful to me in the sense that I come close to the origins and the wonders and the mysteries of life. And that is what it expresses to me.
So that is natural.
Yeah,
we
I
hope.
mean, that's as political as I get,
Yeah.
really, if you want to
Yeah.
talk
Well,
about
and
that.
spiritual. I mean, the minute you bring up the word divine. So this is my chance to ask my last question. And you're on a journey in life, Bernie, and I'm just curious about what you see as doing next. And I would ask the same of Hervé in terms of the kinds of projects that the foundation wants to pursue.
Well, I usually, when questions like that are asked of me, I usually kind of defer to David Bowie's line, "The future belongs to those who can hear it coming."
Mhm. David Bowie and you are very smart. And Hervé?
We are developing many projects at the Fondation in Paris and with the international program, and we still continue to develop projects linked to science, linked to nature. It's again, and what is for us really important, it's to develop the project and to enlarge the circle. For example, we have a very important, for us very important, and probably for the public too, exhibition in France next spring. It's kind of synthesis of what we have done, linked to botanic and linked to animals. And Bernie will be part of the show with the Great Animal Orchestra, with new artists, and mostly with artists from the Amazon.
Mm-hmm. So this again becomes something very consistent and cohesive for the foundation, which is great. And it is certainly a vein of endeavor increasingly here at the Peabody Essex Museum in terms of our climate and environment initiative. And that's one of the reasons why we have been so excited to present the Great Animal Orchestra. So this is our chance for others out there to ask questions. And Trevor Smith, who is our Associate Director for Multisensory Experience and our Curator of the Present Tense, as well as the co-curator for the Great Animal Orchestra, is going to be moderating questions as they come in. So Trevor?
And I am I should acknowledge that I am the co-curator of the show with Janie Winchell, who is our director of the Art and Nature Center. So the first question we have from our audience is, do you record these soundscapes at specific times of day, Bernie? And if so, like how does that soundscape change through the cycle of day and night?
Really great question. I record at all times of day and night because I really want to understand what the cycles are like and what's being expressed throughout the entire day or night cycle. But my favorite times to record are during the dawn chorus, just before dawn and as the sun rises until 20 minutes or so after, in most places of the world. And also the evening chorus, that part of the daytime when the sun is going down and the transition into nighttime, because the soundscapes are much richer than the biophonies are richer. Most of the critters are vocalizing at those particular times of day and night. And to me, that's the prettiest time to listen to those animals.
So we have another question for you, Bernie. In addition to writing down sounds that you hear outside, which is one of the instructions that you gave us in your most recent book, are there other daily practices that people can incorporate into their lives?
Listening practices?
Yes.
Just begin to understand the sources of all of the sounds that you hear in your environment. And as you're thinking about them and writing them down, ask yourself, what of those sources make you feel good? What of those sources make you feel stressed or uneasy? And create a space in your life that's going to eliminate the ones that are not affecting you very well, and surround yourself with those that are life-affirming.
Hervé, we have a question about the future of sound and video, because you've been involved in a lot of leading edge and new developing commissions, and somebody wants to know where you think this is going in the next 5 years.
I have no idea. No, it's for me. It's really difficult to answer to. The question is too large for me because what I can talk about what I'm doing, and I'm really working with not a general concept of sound or visual. We are really working with people with very specific topics, and so it's difficult, but I can try. It's true that also music, for example, there is a kind of hybridation today between different fields, like visual, music, etc., etc. And I think the question is linked to this hybridation of different languages, visual or not. And at the Fondation, it's in the future, in the present and the future, the artists we work with, or we are thinking to work with, or we are very really are linked to this question of hybridation. And so it means in short, the exhibition also is becoming a stage for musicians. So this question of it's the question of the physical presence of the exhibition. So the exhibition, we are still saying exhibition, but it's a stage. Mm-hmm. And since years at the Fondation, we don't have an auditorium, a theater in Paris. So the auditorium, the theater, the stage, the platform is the gallery. Mm-hmm. And so because the lack of tools, we transform the exhibition as an auditorium, cinema, etc., etc., etc. And we are working with movie director. We have done a lot with movie director, with choreograph, with musician. And so the exhibition is a place, is a stage.
Mm-hmm. And also an experience. I mean, that's really what you're talking about because of the breakdown in the categories and the boundaries and that sort of thing.
So the show is a great orchestra.
Yeah, okay, good.
And maybe then that would be a great leaping off point for you to tell us a little bit about the film that you've commissioned about Bernie that will be shown alongside the installation of the Great Animal Orchestra here at PEM.
Yes, we are working with Bernie since years now, and a few months ago I thought, but we have no movie about, no portrait, no film. So I really thought it was really urgent to produce a movie dedicated to your art, to your life, to you, and to Catherine also.
And Trevor, why don't you tell people how visitors to the exhibition are going to be able to see the film?
So the film will be presented daily here in this auditorium, pretty much on the hour, 11, 12, 1, 2, and 3. And so after you have seen this extraordinary installation by Bernie and the United Visual Artists, you'll be able to come down here and see this extraordinary film by Vincent Tricon, who really kind of tells the story of, as the title of the film says, you know, your life with the Great Animal Orchestra. So I think that's a really fantastic addition, using the exhibition to extend the kind of storytelling that we as institutions and museums can facilitate. And speaking of stories that we can facilitate, there's a question here about art being a call to action. And so looking at this installation, you've talked about, you know, how it reveals, let's say, the impact of climate change or species degradation. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about it as a kind of a tool for understanding the environment, because, for instance, one of the big takeaways for me was this idea that you can often understand more about an environment by listening to it than just by looking at it.
Yeah, and Hervé was talking a little while ago about beauty and how the beauty is expressed and how it makes one feel. These soundscapes are probably the most beautiful sounds for me that I've ever heard. I find it hard to imagine anything that is superior. And I listen to a lot of things, music and theater and everything I can think of, you know, because I'm more a listening person than a visual person. But to evoke activity, I think it's almost not, it's not a question of what we need to do to make a better place. It's a question of what we don't do and what we choose not to do. And I think that these soundscapes evoke that question in a different way, so that when we leave this space, we have to consider whether or not we want to preserve this aspect of our natural world. And if you don't, if you want to preserve it, better think about what you're not going to do now.
There's a question here about asking whether you've ever tried to record nature within the din of the city as a kind of a counterpoint or a way to, another way into talking about the importance of the preservation of that sound.
Sure. And there are a lot of critters that have, you know, as their environments have been destroyed or diminished, they've come into cities where, you know, they're in contact with humans and human noise all the time, and they're always fighting that issue. But I suspect it's not the healthiest environment either for humans or for the others, non-human organisms.
So, what is the future of your archive? You've been recording these environments since the early 1970s. You have, what, 5,000 plus hours? What is the future of that archive?
Well, one of the ways that we want to make sure that people still become aware of this stuff is we're looking for an academic home for this archive right now, or a home for the archive where it's going to be used in a way that will be beneficial. And you know, it's been an ongoing project for us.
But part of that story is also what happened because of the fire.
Yeah. In 2017, my wife Catherine and I were completely lost. We lost everything in the fires of Northern California in 2017, and luckily, I had made a copy of my archive. Speaking of political, the reason that I got it to the Fondation Cartier is because of the former administration had kind of put a ban on science and science publication, to the extent that we were afraid we were going to lose the benefits of the raw data in this archive. And so we got it offshore. I made a copy of it in March of 2017 and gave a copy of it to the Fondation to hold. And 6 months later, we lost everything, including all the original tapes, all of my equipment, you know, and everything else that we owned.
Well, that was prescient, certainly in a very tragic kind of way. But I think that everything that we've heard here today from both of you really needs to leave us, good heavens, with a sense of opportunity and challenge and responsibility in a very positive way, that we can make a difference, we should make a difference, because let's face it, we are also part of the animal world. So with that, I'm going to thank Hervé and Bernie and Trevor and all of you for participating in this director's dialogue. It's been a real honor to have this conversation, so thank you.
Thank you,
Linda.
Lynda.